Good morning. Oh, good morning. That sun, my friends, that alone will do wonders for the soul. My name is Reverend Christopher Rowe. I serve as the senior minister here at Fountain Street Church, a community where love and justice and peace and compassion are the shared works of our liberal but also liberating and liberated faith. And it is so good to be with each and every one of you this morning here in this beloved Cathedral of Love and Temple of Peace, but also each and every one of you who's joining us from home this morning, or perhaps you'll watch it later today or months from now, no matter who you are. No matter what you believe, or maybe that is a part of your journey you are navigating right now. Regardless of who you love or who you loved by, regardless of whether you live right up the street or you're one of the many who now watch us from across this country. Each and every one of you has a special place in this community, and each and every one of you has a place of belonging here. And it is an honor for me to be able to spend my hour every Sunday morning with you. And I hope it's an honor for you to share that time with one another. As we prepare ourselves for worship this morning, I would like you to take a moment and turn to one another, see the love that's in your neighbor's eyes, and greet one another. We will be called back with our opening hymn.
Good morning. I'm Margi Derks Peterson, chaplain here at Fountain Street Church. Our invitation this morning comes to us from Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. Hear these words of hope and persistence as they invite us into this time of worship with one another. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hopes springing high, still I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard, 'cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from the past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I am a black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise. I rise. I rise. The contemporary witness comes to us from American poet and activist Amanda Gorman. Hear what the spirit of resistance and persistence is saying to our collective consciousness this morning. We rise. Today, everyone's eyes are on us as we rise. Today is the day women are paving the way. Speaking our truth to power in this hour, it is our duty to find the brave beauty in rooting for other women so they know, too, we are not victims. We are victors, the greatest predictors of progress. We press for change, a new dawn drawn into the open by women whose silence is broken. We push on and act on our responsibility to bring visibility to the most vulnerable, to bring freedom to those who didn't have a choice, to bring volume to those who are using their voice. We clear a woman's way. We don't fear the day she steps into the light, because we are with her every step of the fight. There's a lot at stake, but making a difference always takes great courage. So we encourage women who dare to stare fear square in the face. Women who've always shown that when one woman stands up, she is never alone. We know that when she steps up to right a wrong, she will fight to bring others along, to the network, into the conversation, working together to change communities and nations for generations. Our world made all the stronger, the longer women are able to sit at the table. It is her strength, her story, and her spirit which inspires other vital voices to speak up when they hear it. So let it be said that light will be shed when our world is led by leaders ahead of the headlines, the voices who are first on the front line. These women who stand up knowing the wind not by where it is, but where it is blowing. Leading worlds not by how society is, but where change is going. We all leap forward when one woman tries, when she defies with her rallying cries. Here lies, but does not rest, the best of tested women who call us all to rise, speaking the truth in this finest hour, that to their own power, every single woman is entitled. But it's in how they empower others that makes women's voices so vital.
So, for all intents and purposes, this is the last Sunday of Lent. There is, of course, the drama and the saga of Palm Sunday next week, which leads us into the events of Holy Week. But this is the last Sunday of appointed lessons in the text of the Christian calendar of Lent. And so, as part of our peripheral but pointed observance of Lent here at Fountain Street Church, I thought it could be an interesting exercise for us to engage the assigned text from the Christian lectionary this morning. But before we do, and before we get too deep into the weeds, and let's just pause for a moment and lift up a few realities. So the lesson or the appointed text for us this morning comes from the book of John, which you may recall is the fourth book in the canon or chronicle of gospel stories. And whereas Matthew, Mark, and Luke are familiar with their use of parables to metaphorically lift up and illustrate spiritual truths and political and economic insights, in the book of John, the lessons and the stories are the parables themselves. In other words, rather than Jesus just sitting around teaching his followers through an anthology of parables to underscore the reality of the revolution of which he was a part, the stories of Jesus throughout the book of John are the parables, making them much more nuanced and sometimes more unbelievable than the other gospel stories. And so as we gauge this morning's Lenten lesson, I would encourage you to remember the power of myth and of parable, and remember that these are stories that exist within us, and we exist within them, if not literally, then certainly literarily. So the story begins like this. It's said that there was a man named Lazarus who was sick in the village of Bethany. And Lazarus had two sisters, Mary and Martha. And if you recall those names, it's because this is the very same Mary who had once anointed Jesus' head and also washed his feet. And so Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, obviously in great distress over his declining health, sent word to Jesus that their brother was indeed dying. After all, Jesus was supposed to be a friend to Lazarus. And when Jesus heard this, he responded by saying, okay. And then he went on to say, his sickness won't end in death. In fact, it will bring glory to God and to his Son. How satisfying would that response be for you? Putting yourselves in the shoes of Mary and Martha, how satisfied or contented or appeased or gratified would you feel if the very Savior that you had anointed yourself and the very Lord you had venerated comes back to you with your plea for your brother's health with, don't worry about it. And even if he does die, it'll actually bring glory to God and honor to me. It almost reeks of the contemporary retelling of it as, this is all part of God's plan. Well, this isn't satisfying for the contemporary reader, and it really wasn't satisfying for the ancient characters of Mary and Martha. And so as the story continues, Jesus actually waits another 2 days before discerning that now was a good time to go to Bethany, and as he framed it, wake Lazarus up from whatever it was that Mary and Martha were worried about. He literally tells his disciples, our friend Lazarus is asleep, and I'm going to go there and wake him. So a fair amount of time passed, though we don't know precisely how long, but we do know that it was long enough that when Jesus finally makes his way to Bethany, Lazarus had been dead and buried in a tomb for 4 days. 4 days. And so when Martha and Mary hear that Jesus has finally arrived, it's no wonder that Martha sets out to go find him. And when she does, she approaches him and says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. If you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And after a back and forth with Jesus, her Lord, her Savior, her hope, and her Redeemer, she leaves saying to him, even now, I know you could fix this if you wanted to. So the story continues. And unsatisfied with her exchange with Jesus, Martha then sends Mary to go see Jesus. And not unlike her sister, Mary continues to press on Jesus. And she says to him, echoing her sister, Lord, if you had been there, my brother would not have died. If you had just come, he would not have died. Only this time, a gathering of mourners and supporters of Martha and Mary had swelled into a crowd and began to assemble in solidarity with Mary. Martha and Mary had quite literally built a movement of support by their persistence. Well, moved by their grief, and we might imagine influenced by their persistence, Jesus asks Martha and Mary to take him to the tomb where Lazarus lay. And only then, after the relentless insistence of the sisters, does Jesus order that the stone be rolled away, exposing a living, breathing, bandaged Lazarus waiting to be set free. To which Jesus finally triumphantly says, "Untie his bandages. Untie his bandages and set him free." Here ends the ancient witness this morning. And like so many of the biblical stories, this appointed lesson from the Christian lectionary is pretty hard to believe, and yet somehow it is entirely relatable to our world. And if you can't believe it, or you don't believe it, you can at least distill this morning's message from John down to this, down to the relentless resistance and the pervasive persistence of the women who were insisting on the liberation of Lazarus until the bondages of his bandages were released and set free. I think that the lesson for our contemporary world and even the contemporary Fountain Streeter on this final Sunday of Lent and this final Sunday of Women's History Month lies in the age-old resistance and persistence of women. Up and against a world turning in entirely the wrong direction, and their fight, their advocacy, their resistance, their insistence, and their persistence that the bondages and the bandages of this world be untied and removed by all and any means necessary. So often when this story is told, including probably many of the churches around us, the traditional good news is the story of Jesus triumphantly coming in and breathing new life into Lazarus and bringing justice and liberation to Lazarus's bondaged world. But a critical and historical and feminist lens reminds us that the traditional good news of this story never would have existed without the insistence of Mary and Martha. And the liberation of Lazarus would never have taken place without the persistence of these two women. Remember, it was both Mary and Martha who sent word to Jesus letting him know that Lazarus was sick in the first place. And when Lazarus died because Jesus had waited around for 2 whole days before finally going to Bethany to see him, it was Martha who first confronted him, saying, "Lord, if you had just been here, he wouldn't be dead already." And when it seemed self-evident that Jesus wasn't going to ask any further questions or hear her plea, it was Martha that went back to Mary and said, "Your turn. Your turn." And then she goes and echoes her sister's persistence and says, "Lord, if you hadn't been here, he would never have died in the first place. What are you going to do to fix this?" And in their resistance to an ancient world that too often devalued their voices and their insistence that that very same world bring health and liberation to their brother, it was Mary and Martha's persistence that opened Jesus' awareness to the pain and the suffering, so much so that he finally joined them in the restorative act of liberation. And that is a point I want to make sure we all understand this morning. Because too often the central figures in the spiritual and religious stories we tell are eclipsed by the historic figures like Jesus. But we should impress upon ourselves this morning that in this story, Jesus is not committing the act of restoration and liberation for Lazarus, but rather Jesus is joining Martha and Mary in the ongoing work that they had already been doing. The work that they had already been doing. Jesus was joining them at the invitation of their resistance, their insistence, and their persistence. And of course, there's power and inspiration and wonder to be found in the liberating acts of Lazarus being set free from the bondages and the bandages of this world. But let's not forget or lose sight or even ignore the deeply present persistence of the women that made this reality so for Lazarus and for his world. As I mentioned earlier, alongside being the last Sunday of Lent, it's also the last Sunday of Women's History Month. A month-long observance of the historic contributions of women in our world and for our world, and also a moment to illuminate the ongoing struggles that still exist for women who continue to resist, insist, and persist for a more loving, just, equitable, and inclusive world in which all may be untied of their bandages, set free, and allowed to flourish. And it's not lost on me that the appointed text from John seems to be a reality that feels just as pervasive today as it must have been at the time in which these stories were first canonized. We know, friends, we know that to this day, resistance, insistence, and persistence continue to be the anthem for women around the world, across our nation, across this state we love, here in this community, and even in this church. Because the world still isn't turning in the direction that God longs for it to turn. And much of our political, economic, societal, and religious infrastructure is still antithetical to the ways in which the spirit of love, justice, and peace long for them to be. And yet the stories of resistance, insistence, and persistence, as old as the Bible itself and older yet, keep being told, even in our time, in our places, and in our spaces. Just this past week, I read a beautiful story about the life of Tulia Alvarez, a 74-year-old smallholder farmer from Colombia, whose life and story has become the embodiment of resistance, insistence, and persistence. Alvarez, alongside Alba Portillo and Velma Echevarria, is called the Seed Guardian and represents the growing resistance and persistence against the colonialization and globalization of their Afro-Colombian communities. As the threat of mining, free trade agreements, agrochemicals, and transgenic farming has threatened the indigenous communities throughout Colombia, Alvarez and her persisting peers have dug their heels in to claim, reclaim, and claim yet again their native lands and their indigenous practices. While many indigenous and rural Colombians threw up their hands in absent surrender to the development of their nation, often at the expense of their autonomy, their independence, and their economic well-being, Alvarez saw the systemic ways in which this would harm her and her community. And so she knowingly resisted, insisted, and persisted in such a way that her way of being is not being eradicated from Colombia. Through decades of advocacy, seed harvesting, resistance, and persistence, Alvarez, Portillo, and Echevarria have saved and protected more than 1,200 species of native seeds that continue to grow on their native lands in defiance of capitalism and colonialism all around them. And while their struggle still continues to this day, their persistence pushes onward in this women-led effort to ensure cultural autonomy and societal justice for all indigenous and rural folk in Colombia, not just women. In a world in which their voices and their physical presence are too often diminished and overlooked, the Seed Guardians remind us of the power of persistence and the energy waiting to be unleashed by these women who lead in South America with their soft power. More locally, in this beautiful state of Michigan, I still hold so much wonder and awe for the events that took place right here in Michigan last fall and the events that followed after the overturning of Roe versus Wade. As our nation reeled from the blistering sting of the Supreme Court's shocking decision, women and their allies wasted no time mobilizing all over the state to take the bandages of bondage and untie them for all who relied on reproductive choice. Millions of dollars, billions of hours, and infinite amounts of capacity and social and emotional investment went into the fight to enshrine reproductive justice in Michigan. And were it not for the resistance and the insistence and the persistence of these women and their allies throughout Michigan, including many from this very congregation, I do not believe we would have seen the very strong show of support in November that we saw enshrining these rights through Proposal 3. In an era where women's lived experiences and bodies continue to be challenged, silenced, undervalued, and unjustly legislated, the women who pressed on and persisted in our state joined in the very anthem of Martha and Mary, as well as the anthem sung by Tulia Alvarez and her peers. But even more locally yet, right here at Fountain Street Church, the stories of resistance, insistence, and persistence from the women of this church call our attention into sharper focus this morning. Much like the women of Colombia, who in spite of an economic world often working against them, still persisted in pursuit of cultural independence and economic liberty. And much like the women of this great state of Michigan, who in spite of a political world often working against them, still persisted in pursuit of autonomy for the body and autonomy for reproductive freedom. This 154-year ministry is made up, steeped, and saturated by stories of women's resistance and persistence. I think back to October of 1891. 1891, when the National Convention was held for the Association for the Advancements of Women, and it was held in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and it was held at Fountain Street Baptist Church. Hear that again with me. In 1891, I won't even bother doing the math, you know I can't, when the National Convention for the Association of the Advancement of Women was held, it was held right here in a church on this site. Not the same building, same DNA. And then, of course, I can't think of that convention without thinking of Viva Flaherty, who was in high school at the time, but she was already the leader of her Junior Suffragette Association, and who was as a result of her resistance, her insistence, and her persistence, became a major presence and influence in the labor rights movement, the anti-war movement, and of course, the women's rights movement. And if her name doesn't ring a bell to you this morning, it should, because Viva is the very first Martha and Mary we have on record here. And she is the patron saint of persistence for this church, for it was her who served on the social outreach committee and served as the social outreach secretary here at Fountain Street Baptist Church until 1911. When she publicly resigned from her position in protest of the church's support of factory owners in our community who had been fighting up and against the labor workers' needs and demands in West Michigan. But she didn't stop there. In fact, she published the 29-page manifesto, Facts Hitherto Unpublished, which I've read and I hope you will too, in which she embodied the persistence of Martha and Mary, and she demanded that the broader culture around her join in the work to untie the bandages of labor injustice and set the oppressed, the marginalized, and the exploited free in her world. But friends, truth be told, you can't lift up the story of this patron saint in our church without thinking of the far too few clergy women of years past who've served this church, who've served with love and endurance, even up and against the winds of systemic injustice and currents of institutional inequity. And even if we can't all agree on their reasons and the nature of their departure or the grievances that were left in their wake, we can all agree. We can all agree that their steadfast insistence and their unwavering persistence taught us invaluable lessons about ourselves, our church, and our world. In the spirit of resistance, insistence, and persistence born right here in this church, I also think of the many who long for reproductive justice in their community and thus organized to create the first Planned Parenthood clinic in our community, born from a movement in this church. I think of the many who demanded economic and health equity for the city and for access to safe and healthy abortions, and thus rallied around the creation of the Choice Fund to serve our community, and it still serves and flourishes to this day, born from a movement in this church. I think of the many past and present who long for a better world far beyond these cathedral walls. And they became persevering pioneers in that pursuit, from Dr. Pearl Kendrick and Dr. Grace Eldring, who helped develop the vaccine for the whooping cough and were also members here, to Mary Lou Smith and Corinne Carey, who pioneered in areas of public education, music, and cultural preservation, to the very women who are sitting in these seats today and joining us from home. I think of our friends like Carol Koistra, Carol Townsend, Andrea Heidel, Arlene Chettelberg, Judith Kienitz, Kristen Lundeen, and infinite others sitting in our midst who blaze trails for other women and other minority groups beyond women in politics, community organizing, public health, and social work. Of course, I think of the many women's associations, guilds, and circles that for 1.5 centuries have served this church in many ways that most of us don't fully realize or appreciate or conceptualize. And of course, I think of the many ways in which the Women's Association to this very day, embodies persistence in their unwavering and often unspoken support of this church, almost serving as a heartbeat to everything that happens here, even when you're not paying attention. And of course, I think of the lesser known and the unnamed who've poured infinite hours of time and passion and love and energy and capacity into the ministries that truly make this church thrive, and those women who are still among us, still serving in underthanked capacities, who may never be known, but strive to make this church a more loving, just, inclusive, and compassionate church, and strive to make this world more hopeful, joyful, and peace-filled. This world and this church are filled to the brim with Marys and Marthas that know that the only way to collective liberation from the bondages and bandages of this world is through relentless resistance, immeasurable insistence, and profound persistence. And if there's any lesson that has yet to be said, let me say it now. It must be understood, my friends, that resistance, insistence, and persistence cannot only sit on the shoulders of the Marthas and Marys of this world to get the job done. All over this world and all over this nation and this community and this church, there are bondages and bandages that need to be untied and unwrapped. And it can no longer be on the shoulders of women to make sure that that reality is made so. And to that end, it can no longer be on any one person or one group who finds themselves in a position of oppression or exploitation to have to resist, insist, and persist alone, or be left alone in advocating for themselves. There is a moral and ethical war afoot in our nation and across our society, and it will only be won through a concerted, connected, and collective persistence that reaches across differences and unites for the common good in the godly incarnation of allyship, solidarity, and oneness. And that can only begin when we willingly and willfully learn from the lives, the experiences, and the stories of the oppressed, including women. As Gina Greenlee once said, experience is the master teacher, especially when it's not our own. Experience is the master teacher, especially when it's not our own. There's a whole world out there and in here that, like Lazarus, is waiting to be untied and set free. And so I believe the question before us this morning is whether we will join Martha and Mary and their spiritual daughters in the pursuit of fighting to untie the bondages of our time and set our neighbors free. Everywhere you look, people are waiting to be untied and set free. Trans children in Kentucky and Texas are waiting to be untied and set free. Women's bodies in Florida and Oklahoma are waiting to be untied and set free. Innocent civilians in Ukraine and Palestine are waiting to be untied and set free. Black lives in every U.S. city and rural municipality alike are waiting to be untied and set free. Immigrants at any one of our borders are waiting to be untied and set free. Bodies belonging for sanctuary from gun violence are waiting to be untied and set free. Bodies longing for reproductive justice are waiting to be untied and set free. Bodies longing to wear drag or get adequate health care or nourish themselves with affordable food or find a place where they can put themselves safely in shelter at night are waiting to be untied and set free. The hopes and dreams of our ancestors are waiting to be untied and set free. The hopes and dreams of future generations are waiting to be untied and set free. The hopes and the dreams of all who call this fragile earth island their home and all who call this cathedral of love and this temple of peace their home are waiting for that to be untied and set free. And it is on no one person or one group to do that work alone. For it is on each of us and all of us to commit ourselves and our very being to the collective persistence, like the Marys, like the Marthas, like the Seed Guardians, like the advocates of Proposal 3, like the four mothers of this church, and the spiritual sisters you're sitting around this morning. And it's on all of us to work together until we can finally say that, like Lazarus, all of community can be untied of our bandages and set free of our bondages. So may this ending of Lent, this ending of Women's History Month, and this ending of one era be an invitation into the beginning of another. May this be a new season of learning from the experiences of those all around us, and may we, the stewards of this church and this beloved community that calls it home, join together in unity and hope in the pursuit of untying the bandages around us and setting one another free. May it be so. Happy Women's History Month. Thank you. You may be seated. We are indeed a gentle, loving people. It's one of my favorite things about this community, and that is indeed one of our shared efforts and values here. I see from the women and the men and all people, all walks of life, all gender identities and expressions, ages, stages. It's truly one of the greatest gifts of this community is the love that pours out from it. One of the ways in which we sing for our lives and sing for our neighbors' lives together is through the weekly collection of the offering. That is a tangible way in which we express that song and that anthem we share, and that way in which we persist into the community, recognizing that sometimes there are needs greater than anything we can offer here, and so 50% of that collection we take goes directly into organizations that we trust and know can steward those gifts better than we. And of course, the other 50% stays here helping to staff our ministries, keep this magnificent building going forward, and offer more and more ways in which we can be the kind of community that is here for centuries to untie the bandages of this world. So in the spirit of love and the spirit of the song we sing together, the offering will now most graciously be received. You can come up. We've got all kinds of announcements this morning for you before we depart. Kathy Higgins from Stewardship will be coming up here in a moment. While she does, I'd like to draw attention to the beautiful flower arrangement behind me. That is given for our worship this morning by Dale, Mary Jo, and Jeffrey Smith in loving memory of their daughter and sister, Kelly H. Smith, doctor of veterinary medicine, who unexpectedly passed away 8 years ago. And I'd like to share this short little lyrical from them. Remembering you is easy. We do it every day. It's the pain of losing you that never goes away. Our heart is with their family as they remember this day.
Good morning. My name is Kathy Higgins, and I have been asked to share with you why I pledge to Fountain Street Church. Fountain Street Church provides me with the opportunity, an opportunity for spiritual growth and to connect to something larger than myself, an opportunity to develop relationships with others my same age, younger, and older, an opportunity to dive deeper into the meaning and purpose of living and dying, an opportunity to teach often what I need to learn. an opportunity to put my energy, attention, and creativity into supporting this church and her congregants and community in our world, and an opportunity to continue to engage in insisting, persisting, and resisting in our church as women have done before us, as women are doing now, and as the women who will follow us. Jim and I make our pledge every year by sending 2 checks. You can pledge in several ways. In the Friday Flash, there's a link to pledging. On the website, there's a link for pledging, and you can pick up a pledge card in the back of church and make your pledge. If, however, you decide you cannot commit to making a pledge, you can always make a contribution of record and donate online or by check anytime. If you've already made your pledge, you can also add to your pledge by just making an individual and separate donation, which is also added to our income for the operations and programming for the benefit of our church. I'm very pleased to announce that currently our pledge total is $560,000. This is amazing, and we appreciate all the pledges that are coming in. We are just short of $40,000 to make our budget of $600,000 for the year. We are steadily increasing this amount every week, and we are so grateful for your generosity. The goods and services auction is currently accepting donations online or by a form and until April 1st. Bidding for items starts April 2nd to April 30th. Items are added daily, and there are some fun opportunities to bid on, such as a homemade pasta and wine dinner for 6 people, wine and cheese and watercolor for 4 people, the use of a vacation home in Florida for a week, the use of a vacation home, a cottage up north for a weekend, and many, many more items. So please be creative and see if you would like to donate things like pet sitting, assistance with gardening in your home, or to share your artistic talent and write a poem or donate a unique piece of art. Thank you.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Kathy. And thank you to the stewardship team who dutifully serves this church. They meet every other week all year long. Very committed. So some of you probably noticed or felt like that was a very long sermon for me. I did. And part of that was because there's so many rich, wonderful, amazing stories to include. And people were sending to me, and I'm trying to collate, and I've got my own thoughts. And so I've got great news. The Art and Architecture Tour is back, and starting today, after the service, Marie Penny will be leading a talk in the chapel about the Women's Association. So the synchronicity there is very exciting. There are a lot more stories about the ways in which women persisted in this church and beyond, and it's a wonderful opportunity to learn a little bit more about our DNA and be inspired to look to our future together as a community of love and justice. So I do invite you to that. It's in the chapel right out there, right after the service. You have time to grab some coffee and whatnot, but if you're interested in that, I hope you'll make it there. This is our first one in the spring series of the Art and Architecture Tours. I also want to draw your attention to somebody who's been visiting our church quite a bit lately, and I promised him I'd give him a little nod. I think he's sitting over there. This is Doug Corey. Doug Corey is a senior at Grand Valley State University, and he is an anthropology student studying our church. And first, can I just say it's nice to have someone studying our church with a positive spin? It's great. Yay! We had a wonderful meeting last week. I explained to him that it's not uncommon for students to come explore what Fountain Street's about as a class or as a project, but there's usually kind of a different angle. So we are so grateful for your, we're so grateful for what Doug is bringing to us. And so part of his work is he is hoping to speak with people for 20 or 30-minute slots, not just today. He's just here. He's been visiting for a while. He's a wonderful student, a wonderful supporter of Fountain Street. And so I hope if you're interested in sharing a bit about your experience and kind of enriching the anthropological lens of this, I hope that if he approaches you, you'll either greet him graciously or maybe even oblige or send him on to some members who would be a resource to him. I'm thinking of many of you out there that would be a great resource. So welcome, Doug, and please greet him graciously when you see him over the coming weeks. Also, we have a congregational workshop tomorrow at 6 p.m. Dinner is included, and this is, though technically the tower and the building and everything we know about that is the impetus to the conversation, it's really about polarity management, something that Barry Johnson has talked with us about, something that other groups, Todd Johnson actually has talked about in the chapel service. And it's just a way to kind of look at different diverging viewpoints and perspectives of things and how there are actually many middle ways, many middle paths that we can embark on together. And so I hope you'll make it to that. Please RSVP so we know how much food to get you, but that's at 6 o'clock, and the workshop will begin at 6:30. Additionally, we have some Holy Week events that will be sent out to you this week, but I'll draw your attention to them because one is also an RSVP format. On Holy Thursday or Maundy Thursday, some traditions do it, we're going to have a dinner in the social hall. And this is going to be kind of, rather than me pontificating at you, it's going to be an opportunity to look at what agape theology and ideology looked like in the ancient world, as well as to retell some of those ancient stories. And then we will also retell the Passion story with a creative spin on it in a service right after the dinner. And then on Friday, Fountain Street will be represented over at Westminster at noon. And that will be a downtown clergy put-together service. We've been working on it for a few months. It's going to be music-heavy, a lot of beautiful classical music, a lot of beautiful choir music, and then a lot of readings and prayers. And some retelling of that story as well. And so I hope that you'll consider that. But that's enough on that for now. My favorite part. The thank yous. As you notice, Robin Connell was not here today. Robin is ill, and so we wish her well on recovering quickly from a stomach bug. And we are so grateful on many levels and for many reasons for Joe DeWinkle this morning. So thank you, Joe, for stepping up last minute. Such a treat. I want to thank the AV staff, as always, for all of the rolling with it and just keeping us supported. It's so nice to get up and not worry about anything. It's wonderful. So thank you to our AV staff, who's always there for us. And we owe the choir a huge load of gratitude because in addition to preparing for the oratorio on the 15th of April, which I hope you'll support, we still continue to enjoy their music every week, which is remarkable because they are working tirelessly on the oratorio and preparing liturgical music for us, including this morning's very challenging piece. I requested that piece 3 years ago, and the music director said at the time, 5 years ago, when I first started here on my first Sunday I preached, and I said, can we do Wanting Memories? And they said, I don't think the choir's ready for that right now. And Austin, thank you so much. Choir, thank you so much. You were ready and we were blessed, so thank you. And thank you to each and every one of you who continues to come here and support this church and continue to be part of its flourishing and be part of the untying of the bondages in this world. Our blessing is inspired by a vignette from that Amanda Gorman poem we heard earlier. Hear these words again as they push us out in a hope-filled inspiration this morning. We push on and act on our responsibility to bring visibility to the most vulnerable, to bring freedom to those who didn't have a choice, to bring volume to those who are already using their voice. We clear a woman's way. We don't fear the day. She steps into the light because we are with her every step of the fight. May we go forth from this place in the spirit of resistance, renewed by persistence, and in pursuit of peace, love, and joy everywhere. Thank you for being with us this week.